It was one of those chilly March evenings that made everything in the city look sharper than usual. The glow of headlights, the shimmer of wet pavement, even the breath of strangers clouding the air outside the grocery store. Inside Maple Mart, the hum of ceiling lights and the low murmur of conversation filled the aisles. Shopping carts squeaked across the tile floor. Somewhere near the back, a refrigerator fan whirred in a tired rhythm. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't quiet either. Just that steady, human noise of people doing ordinary things at the end of a long day. Evan Ross, 26 years old, pushed his half-filled cart through the produce section. He worked construction and was always tired, shoulders sore, jeans dusted with the faint orange of dried clay. His days were a loop of early mornings, hard labor, and cheap dinners. Still, he tried to cook for himself, even if it was usually boxed pasta or frozen stir-fry. He reached for a bag of apples, turning one in his hand, and saw something out of the corner of his eye. An older woman, maybe late 70s, short and slightly stooped, standing in front of the cereal shelves. She wore a long wool coat with one of those fuzzy collars that had seen better winters. Her hands trembled just enough to notice as she compared two cereal boxes. She reminded him, suddenly, almost painfully, of his grandmother, who'd passed 2 years earlier. The way her coat sleeves were just a little too long, the way she mouthed the words on the box as if reading them out loud to herself. It was uncanny. He looked away quickly, trying not to stare. But when he passed her again, he caught her muttering under her breath. No, that one's too much. Maybe the store brand, she said softly, sliding one box back and picking up another. Evan smiled faintly. Something in her voice, gentle, cautious, made him slow down without realizing it. A few minutes later, they both ended up in the same checkout line. There were only 3 people ahead. A young couple chatting over their phones, and a man in a leather jacket tapping his foot impatiently. Evan noticed the old woman unload her cart carefully. Canned soup. Milk, a loaf of bread, tea bags, oatmeal, a small packet of chicken, and a few vegetables. Modest, simple groceries, essentials. The cashier, a teenage girl with tired eyes, began scanning the items. "That'll be $38.72, ma'am," she said politely. The woman reached into her purse, one of those faded floral ones that looked older than both of them, and pulled out a debit card. Her hands shook as she inserted it into the reader. A pause. Then the little machine beeped. She blinked, frowning, and tried again. "Same result. I'm sorry," she stammered. "It should work. Maybe I'll just—" She looked down at her groceries helplessly. "Take off the chicken and the tea." The teenage cashier hesitated, glancing at the growing line. "Sure thing," she said, voice uncertain. She rescanned, removed a few items, and the total dropped slightly. The old woman tried again. Her lips tightened. You could almost see the embarrassment creeping up her neck like heat. She leaned closer and whispered, "I think there's a mistake. My son, he said he'd add a little money." Behind her, someone sighed loudly. The man in the leather jacket muttered, "Come on, lady." Under his breath, Evan's stomach twisted. He hated that sound, the kind that made someone small shrink even smaller. He took one step forward. "Hey," he said gently, "it's fine. Don't worry about it." The woman turned, startled, her eyes watery with confusion. "Oh, no, dear, really," Evan said. He reached for his wallet and slid his own card across the counter before she could protest. "Just put it on mine." The cashier looked at him uncertainly. Sir?" "Yeah," he said, nodding. "All of it." The woman's mouth fell open. "No, you can't do that. That's too much," Evan smiled. "It's just groceries." "Don't worry about it." She shook her head, flustered. "I can't let you. I don't even know your name." He chuckled softly. "It's Evan." "Evan," she repeated, almost as if testing the sound. "You can't." But by then the transaction had already gone through. The screen blinked, approved, and the cashier began bagging the groceries quickly, as if trying to escape the awkwardness. The woman blinked a few times, as if unsure what to do. Her eyes were glassy now. "Young man," she said softly, "you didn't have to." "I know," Evan said. "But I wanted to." She stared at him a moment longer. Her lips trembled, halfway between gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, dear." He just nodded and stepped aside to let her finish. When she was done, she struggled a little to lift the paper bags. Evan moved forward instinctively. "Here, let me help you carry them to your car." "Oh no, I couldn't." "Please," he said, smiling. "It's cold out." "I don't mind." After a small pause, she nodded. "That's very kind of you." Outside, the evening air was crisp and sharp. The parking lot lights cast halos on the wet pavement. They walked slowly toward a small, battered sedan parked near the edge. She walked carefully, one hand on her cane, the other clutching the side of the bag. "Do you live far from here?" Evan asked casually. "Oh, just a few blocks," she said. "I usually walk, but my knee's been acting up lately." "It's silly getting old," he smiled softly. "Not silly. Just life." She looked at him sideways. "You talk like someone twice your age," he laughed. "Guess work'll do that to you." They reached her car, and he set the bags gently in the back seat. She opened the door and sighed. "You remind me of my grandson," she said suddenly. "He used to help me with groceries too. Before he moved away." Evan felt a small ache in his chest. "Yeah? Yes, he was about your age. Always so patient." She smiled faintly. "You have kind eyes, Evan." He looked down, unsure what to say. Compliments from strangers always hit different, especially ones that felt like they came from someone's heart. "Thank you, ma'am." She adjusted her scarf and looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you live around here?" "Yeah, couple miles away. Just got off work. Wasn't planning on grocery shopping, but guess I'm glad I did." She chuckled softly. Sometimes the best moments aren't planned. They talked for another minute. Small things, gentle things. The kind of conversation that feels like warmth in a cold world. Before he left, she touched his sleeve lightly. "Can I at least give you something for dinner? A few dollars?" He shook his head. "No need," her eyes softened. "Then I'll say a prayer for you tonight." "That's worth more than dollars," Evan smiled. "I'll take that." She climbed into her car slowly, waved, and drove off. For a while, he stood there, watching the red taillights fade into the misty street. Something about that moment stayed with him, not because he'd done anything big, but because it had felt right, simple, human. That night, back in his apartment, Evan sat at his small kitchen table eating microwaved lasagna. The groceries he'd bought for himself sat unopened on the counter. He found himself thinking about her again. Her gentle voice, her trembling hands, the way her eyes had filled when the card declined. He wondered if anyone else ever looked out for her. If she had family nearby, if she'd be warm tonight. He picked up his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't have her number, of course. Just her face in his memory, kind, wrinkled, familiar. Then he remembered, when she'd thanked him at the store, she'd mentioned her name briefly. Margaret. There was a small church near his neighborhood, St. Paul's Community Church, that hosted a senior food program. Maybe she went there. The next weekend, he dropped by to volunteer. The church's basement smelled of coffee and cardboard boxes. Elderly folks sat chatting at folding tables while volunteers sorted cans and bread. Evan joined quietly, stacking boxes along the shelves. About half an hour in, he heard a familiar laugh. Soft, warm, unmistakable. He turned, and there she was. Margaret, wearing the same wool coat, talking to another woman about knitting patterns. When she saw him, she blinked, then her face lit up in recognition. "Evan?" he smiled. "Hey, Margaret." "My goodness," she said, standing slowly. "You're volunteering here?" "Yeah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Figured I'd give it a try." She looked at him, eyes bright with emotion. "You don't even know what that means to me," he shrugged. "Just felt right." Over the next few weeks, they became unlikely friends. Evan started coming every Saturday. They'd unpack boxes, serve coffee, and chat about everything. Her late husband, his job, her garden that she couldn't tend to anymore, his dreams of one day starting his own workshop. She began to remind him even more of his grandmother, not just in the way she spoke, but in how she cared. She'd bring him homemade cookies, scold him for skipping breakfast, tell him to find a nice girl who could cook more than pasta, and in return, he'd fix her leaky faucet, replace a burned-out light bulb, or drive her to church when her car wouldn't start. What began as one small act of kindness turned into something that changed both their lives. A quiet friendship that filled two lonely spaces. One afternoon, months later, as summer rolled in and the sunlight poured through her living room curtains, Margaret sat with a cup of tea looking thoughtful. "You know," she said softly, "the day my card didn't work at the store, I almost didn't go shopping at all." I was embarrassed. My son forgot to transfer money again. I told myself I'd wait another week, but I went anyway, and then there you were. Evan smiled gently. Guess fate had good timing. She reached out, placed her hand over his. "No, dear. You had good timing." He didn't know what to say. Sometimes words only get in the way of what the heart already knows. So he just smiled. "You've done plenty for me too, you know," she laughed. "What could I have done for a young man like you?" "Reminded me what matters," he said. "That people still care. That kindness doesn't disappear." Her eyes glistened and she squeezed his hand. "Then I'd say we're even." A few months later, when autumn came again, Evan showed up at Maple Mart one evening after work. He walked through the aisles, thinking about how much had changed since that night. The store looked the same flickering light above aisle 4, same bored cashier scanning boxes of cereal. But he felt different. At the checkout, he saw another elderly woman struggling with her wallet, and without even thinking, he stepped forward. "Don't worry about it," he said softly, handing his card to the cashier. The woman looked up, surprised. "Oh, thank you, Sonny, but I couldn't possibly—" "It's no problem," he said, smiling. And for a moment, as she thanked him with teary eyes, he could almost hear Margaret's gentle voice in his head. Sometimes the best moments aren't planned. Later that night, as he walked home under the glow of streetlights, Evan realized that the small act that had begun as impulse had rippled outward, changing him, connecting him, reminding him of what his grandmother used to say. When you help someone, even just a little, the kindness doesn't stop. It keeps walking long after you're gone. And somewhere across town, in a cozy little house with lace curtains and a half-knitted blanket on the couch, Margaret whispered a prayer before bed, one she said every night since that evening at Maple Mart. Bless the kind-hearted boy who helped an old woman when no one else would. She smiled, blew out her bedside candle and drifted to sleep, knowing that in a world that often rushed too fast, kindness still found its way into quiet corners.